Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Nicola, Naya and Louise. You've had a chance to hear from them. Now we have a chance to hear from you. We have about half an hour left, 25 minutes maybe. And we have a microphone, I think, that we can pass around. So Louise has rather nicely summarised it for me. I don't need to summarise it. And she's kind of simplified the matrix, if you like. She mentioned 4 different types of dimension along which we might look at this: the type of issue, the type of knowledge, the type of action, the type of tool. So what I suggest we do is at least try and work through them and have a number of comments about each one of those and see where we get to by the end. And I think right at the end there's a final question to you, which is, do you think that this way of trying to look more systematically at how research-based evidence influences policy is a useful thing to do? So please, we're looking for comments from the floor. Please keep it brief. Please remember you're on the record. Try and ask comments, give comments and examples from your own experience rather than ask questions, although I will come back to the speakers at the end so that they can answer any questions that come up. And also stand, say your name and where you're from, and speak into the microphone, otherwise our colleagues on the internet can't see or hear you. So does that sound okay? Shall we start? See if anybody wants to talk about the type of issue. Nobody wants to talk about type of issue? We may come back to that in the end. Type of knowledge, another dimension. Okay, we've got one. Let's see if we can get any more on the type of knowledge. So stand up, say your name, where you're from.
My name is Lata. I'm from the University of Durham. And my question is related to the type of, comment is related to the type of knowledge, but to ask questions, or I've written it down, to ask a question about the nature of that knowledge. And I suppose this relates to my own work on knowledge and power, but I think Dr. Paudel talked about it in his presentation when he said that some of the most authoritative information that they're using in the forestry sector is coming from bilateral evaluation reports. And I think there is, because this session is about power, I think I'm interested to know whether the rapid where in the rapid framework questions around the nature of the knowledge that we're talking about fit in. Because I think if we can't talk about that, then talking about the influence of that knowledge is unhelpful, because that nuance is lost. And related to that is where I noticed in quite a lot of the presentations and the discussion around the various actors that are implicated in knowledge and policy, but where I suppose the people that are affected by these policies are located, and who are meant to represent their views. So there was quite a lot of discussion around bureaucracies and researchers and to some extent civil society. But for instance, especially with Dr. Paudel's example with forestry, where it's communities that are being affected by these policies, which actor within that matrix are actually meant to represent those people's views, particularly when we're in a knowledge infrastructure that's privileging, well, as you said, reports from DFID and bilateral donors. And it's to try to unpack some of that a little bit.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. We'll come back at the end to the speakers if they want to respond to that. Does anybody else want to respond to that? Anybody got any experiences they want to talk about, how different actors can be represented in these sorts of processes, the kinds of knowledge that they use? What works, what doesn't work? Yes, please. Please say your name, organisation, and speak into the microphone.
I'm Stephen
Thanks.
Biggs, and I'm a research fellow at it's changed its name, the School of Development Studies at the University, but I've retired. My question is a more general one. The role of individual behaviour, I'd like the speakers to refer to. In some of the policy situations I've looked at in a historical way, there have been various people over the long term repeatedly coming in either the technical area or the policy area or the ministerial area, and that I'd like you to reflect on, because there's no bubble which says which looks at the role of the individual behaviour of particular people.
Can I ask you to reflect upon that, based on your experience? Who are they? Where are they? How do they contribute? Do they stay in the same place? Do they move around? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, one example is in Nepal. There is a program concerned with leasehold forestry, which runs in parallel to some of the major government programs. But if one looks at that program over the last 20 years, you will find that particular people, either in the bureaucracy, the forestry bureaucracy, or in the aid bureaucracy, have been around and gone back to experiences they gained 10 years before or 10 years later. These things didn't just take place. There's a history of people who are reinforcing. And the crucial thing of some of these actors, individual behavior, they've generally got a moral commitment. You won't find some of them going and doing something out of character. When they come up again, you find, oh, he or she was doing that 15 years ago in another part of the country. Or if they're in the bureaucracy, you'll find they're known to be somebody who's a stickler for making sure rights of poorer people are kept to the front of and losing their job sometimes. And they stay in the bureaucracy, but it'll come up again. 5 years later, you'll find they've weathered that period. So that's and it goes right the way through technical issues, bureaucratic issues, and it comes down to then looking more at their personal behaviour over time.
Very good, thank you very much. Let's come back to that if we've got time at the end, because that raises interesting questions about tools, approaches. How do you capitalise or work with or take account of those people? Anybody want to pick up either of these 2 points, either with a comment or personal experience, or shall we get the speakers to comment on them? Okay, you 2 questions, I think. One is around the nature of knowledge. 2 parts to that question, I think, from, I didn't quite catch your name, Nata? Lata from Durham, I got that down. Where in the rapid framework is power? Where are the people in this process affected by the policies? Who represents their work? That's one question. The other question from Stephen Biggs about these individuals. Where does that fit into this? What do we know about that? And then I added on to the end of that, what can we do about that? Over to you 3.
You want to start?
It's interesting that the knowledge comes from bilateral projects, their evaluation, or even basic surveys, baseline surveys, because government like ours has not enough capacity to invest in research. So whenever it requires any such kind of knowledge, information, even basic data, it has to rely on data or information or report of the World Bank or ADB or DFID or any other external agency. So that's lack of its own capacity is one thing. And second, also apart from lack of its own data, it's also related with the power, because DFID provides money. So if we use their data, their knowledge, our project will be accepted easily. So that's why we use World Bank data or ADB data or those. Second, about where are the users, the local communities. I was trying to put in the civic group, civic movements, because most of our user groups, they are not only locally dispersed local user groups, most of them are federated at the national level. For example, we have FECOFON, the National User Federation of Forest User Groups. So it's not only in forestry, but if you go to irrigation, community irrigation, and they have local and regional and national networks. So community school, national networks. Community rural electrification, so you have again national networks. So all these local communities, they all have their national federation through which they can express their voice and they can influence in policies.
Okay, thanks a lot. Do Louise or Nicola want to add on anything on that?
Yeah, I think the two questions are actually quite nicely linked. In answer to the first question, and this is for the UK, I'm answering for the UK, my experience is not elsewhere, but in the UK, I don't think we do a very good job of systematically sourcing and interpreting citizen knowledge. I think that people use citizen juries and things like that with gay abandon, but don't actually put it into a robust context or a robust analysis of what context they should be using those in. I think there's a huge amount more work that needs to be done. I think the advent of IT tools makes it very tempting for people to build policy based on anecdote. And I worry about the quality and the systematic nature of tools that are used to deal with these very complex, very fast-moving, and these very complex, very fast-moving issues that are contested by lots and lots of different sort of epistemological communities. But if policymakers do too much of that, paradoxically, might they be accused of trying to undermine the democratic process in the UK? If policymakers were to take on citizens' juries and to do a lot of that, how would that run up against this odd accountability matrix between citizens and the legislature and the bureaucrats? I don't know. I'm just posing that as a question back to you. The role of individual behaviour from Stephen, I think the danger of focusing too much on personal behaviour comes back to this idea that you need something systematic. Because if you do focus too much on the one person who you know can steer your policy through, and that person leaves, the whole structure goes. So it does come back to having a systematic understanding of what policy tools we can use to operate in this very complex and emergent space.
Nicola?
Yeah, just quickly, the question about where is power embedded within the rapid framework. I mean, I think we would see it embedded throughout. And particularly, we've consciously moved away from only using the term evidence, which we think is quite a technocratic conceptualization of knowledge, and consciously trying to look at different sources of knowledge and who's generating those, who's using those, who has the power to then use them in an informed way. So I think that is particularly what we're trying to bring that in, but I think it also fits in all of the other dimensions we've looked at as well. In terms of citizen knowledge, just the work that we did with DFID on their the consultation process in Africa around the development of their research strategy, what was really highlighted there was that even if there are mechanisms in which to reach out to citizens to solicit their knowledge needs, citizens often lack the capacity to articulate that in a way that's useful for researchers. So there's a lot of active translation that needs to happen at that level before you even get to then translating the research products later on. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got two more hands going up. So it's free-form now, whatever you like.
My name's Andrew Barnett. I just felt that it's worth just pursuing Louise's thing about accountability, because it seems to me that's part of where we're at. And I think this institution is very strong on issues of political economy, and I would have thought there was a lot to be gained from really pushing in that area. I think there's a presumption when people talk in this area about the more actors, the better. And I think that comes from the fact that most people were not given access to the process. I think in our society, we've got the opposite problem. We've got a NIMBY problem. It's impossible to do anything because there are too many unaccountable voices. And I think the issue, and Parliament doesn't seem to mediate these effectively any longer. And so I think there is an issue, and part of what's going through my mind is the issue of legitimacy. Where does the legitimacy come? It's either nominal through elections, or an institution like this, because it has a reputation for producing high quality material of a certain sort. And I think issues, and goes into these things that I'm sure Nicola is an expert, is about the sources of power. Because it seems to me there's a presumption somehow in a lot of this debate that civil society organisations are a good thing and always benign. And it seems to me the idea that, you know, warlords are NGO pressure groups, aren't they?
Yep.
And so I think the whole issue of how one regulates, optimises, and I would say educates the actors in the process it seems to me a fruitful way of looking at this thing, and particularly for each of us as actors, what is it that we can do to legitimise what we're saying in a way rather than just we're richer or white or something else that gives us the power to do these things that other people can't do. But I'm really struck by, in the UK, the school meal debate, which in my area was stopped. They voted for chips and turkey Twizzlers, the death penalty, homeopathy is my hobby horse, cure oil, snake oil. I mean, you know, if people want it, what's the problem? But, you know, it does seem to present a series of issues. But I think so the political economy, legitimacy, accountability, and sources of legitimacy seem to be where it should be at, I think. I don't know if that helps or hinders.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And somebody at the back wants to say something. And we have something that's come in from somebody on the internet. I'll read that question out next.
Hi there, my name's Mark Napier. I'm doing some consulting work for DIPID at the moment. Two quick questions. One about procurement processes and whether you spent much time thinking about the inefficiencies of government procurement processes. It seems to me that is quite a major issue around getting timely information into the policy arena. And then secondly, again, whether you, I recognise that your report was trying to draw common themes across sectors, and I think that was really interesting. My particular focus is the financial sector, which it seems to me will have very, very different sort of policy-making dynamics to health, for example. And I wondered if at any point in your analysis you got sort of nervous about trying to draw commonalities without taking, if you like, a slightly more defined sectoral approach.
Okay, anybody else in the room? Not yet. Okay, we have a question coming from somebody called Lucas from UN Wider in Helsinki, who says few places such as IDRC and ODI are focused on long-term projects on the influence of research findings in policy making. What will be the next developments on this? Rather charmingly put, led by ODI. I'm not sure we lead them, but anyway, he knows how to get us to answer his question. Anything else, or should we go back to the speakers? Yes?
Hi, I'm Melissa Pearson. I'm a research student from University of New South Wales, but based in Sri Lanka. I'm just sort of interested in the issue about the sort of legislators and the focus sort of changing a little bit towards that, and sort of interested partly because of the research we're doing is looking, I suppose, at a lower level of policy that isn't a sort of a national policy. I mean, a lot of policy gets enacted at a much lower level of people doing things and enacting things and changing things without that big sort of superstructure that operates around a policy process. And so I was just sort of wondering, I mean, the particular research I'm doing is looking at the issue of suicide, where some agricultural policymakers, bureaucrats, I suppose, have enacted a lot of bans against certain pesticides which are implicated in suicide, but part of what they talk about of their success is that the legislators aren't interested in that particular issue, so they have this policy space to be able to operate and make decisions without that sort of influence of you know, and they don't want to enact policy that might engage the politicians, because then you get into a whole nother discourse and negotiation process about that. And so I just wondering whether that's sort of another area where your framework can be sort of applied.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we, speakers, take your pick? Louise, you've got your pencil up. You go first.
Legitimacy, yes, absolutely. Yes, I think I agree with everything you said. Procurement process and timeliness of information. Yes, absolutely. I agree with all of that. A point that I would make is that somebody once described the interface between research and policy as being a very percussive process, in that policymakers go and beat up researchers with what they want, and researchers then go and beat up policymakers with 300-page reports. And we need to make that, slightly less percussive. And one of the ways of doing this, and I think actually the onus here is on policymakers to change their behaviour and to change the way that they receive evidence. I think that the evidence suppliers have pretty much done as much as they can, apart from shorten your reports. Please don't give me 300 pages, give me 2. If I can photocopy it and take it to a meeting, it's going to work a lot better. Okay, so just shorten and put it in context. But also, the way to receive information, I think, in the policy process is to say, what is the risk of taking the wrong decision because the information is uncertain or incomplete? And rather than presenting it as, this is the information you need to make this decision, say this is the information that you need kind of in this space, and the risk of taking the wrong decision is X because this is what you want to decide on, and this bit of it is uncertain. So we need to think about receiving information in the context of the risk of taking the wrong decision. Next steps in the research policy interface. I think watch this space. I think there are lots of sort of little initiatives that are happening. There's certainly a growing agenda around knowledge brokering, and who knowledge brokers are, what are they? Are they think tanks? Should you have knowledge brokers inside government departments? Who do they report to? Can you share them? I think the knowledge brokering agenda is going to be a very fruitful one in future, which will get at all these issues of legitimacy. I'll stop there. I could go on forever.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Louise. Naya?
I just want to share one experience about the legitimacy and accountability crisis. One of the major changes in policy process in, I think, many of the developing countries, not only Nepal, is from single bureaucracy controlled system to a multi-stakeholder forums, policy forums, where you have 10, 15, 20 different stakeholders. The problem with these forums is, if you take the example of forest dwellers or forest user groups or forest managers or anything, they used to be the 50% partner before with the government. Government one party, the forest users, forest dependent another party. Now among 25 stakeholders, the forest dwellers, they are one among 25, and probably illiterate or even literate. They can't speak on the national kind of language with the policymaker or researchers. Probably they are not fit personally or not habitual to share their experience in such kind of forums. So they are even more marginalized with these multi-stakeholder forums now. And very remote stakeholders, the researcher or civil societies or other stakeholders, apart from both neither the government nor the local communities. So third party are becoming more influential, and there is a real crisis of legitimacy. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I fully agree with the issues already mentioned around accountability and legitimacy. Just a quick point about the sectoral issues. I mean, what we tried to do was to move away from a discussion about the knowledge policy interface that lumped all issues together, so to speak. There really wasn't a lot of systematic discussion of how issues might differ by sectors, and so we tried to develop a framework to start thinking about what dimension should we look at. So we recognize that the dynamics are very different, but we wanted a starting point to think about a systematic way to unpack that. So would fully agree, finances and health are going to be very different, but we don't have access to good people in the financial sector, so I'd love to talk more on that. With the procurement process, I mean, again, yes, given that so much about the knowledge production process is also about relationships and trust, then just having this ongoing very technocratic procurement process is probably not the best way to build up that kind of legitimacy. And then finally, the point from your work in Sri Lanka. I mean, I think it resonates a lot with the work that we do on gender and childhood. I mean, with the gender mainstreaming agenda, We find that in many countries, because national policymakers were really not paying attention, didn't care too much, that actually you've got a huge number of initiatives pushed through, but then no ownership. So you have national women's machineries, you have gender mainstreaming action plans, but nobody's familiar with them. So yes, you've managed to bring about this change on paper, but the effect on at the grassroots level is very minimal. And I've just seen that in work I've been doing in Ethiopia. I mean, if you look at the policy framework, it's astoundingly strong in terms of gender equality, but try going to villages and it's, looking at the way programs are implemented there, it's very, very different. So I think while it's good in the short term, and it might be that a useful leveraging point, unless you have that ongoing dialogue with people with power, I don't think it will change too much. And then the final point, I'd really echo what Loui said about in terms of future agendas. We think there's a lot of work that has to be done around the role of intermediaries. That I think increasingly we realize that people don't have the space or institutional incentive structures to move outside their home turf, even if they recognize the need for knowledge translation. We need more professionals, but we need to experiment with where they should be located, who they should be, and what kind of partnerships they should forge.
Very good, thank you very much, Nicola. You might not thank me for this, but I wondered at one point whether you were going to go on and tell people about your experience with a huge global program dealing with healthcare, where you were trying to encourage them to take gender seriously and having huge problems actually getting those issues taken seriously. So it's not a problem unique to developing countries. This policymakers deliberately missing the point or trying to avoid the point is a very common problem in this area around the world. So that brings us to the end rather nicely on time. I think we had some really useful contributions from the floor which will feed into our thinking about how to flesh out this framework. I'm going to take it that given the sort of the range of comments from the floor about different dimensions of this, that to try and break it down into dimensions is a good thing. So we're going to take away from this meeting that you think it's a good thing. If you disagree with that, send us an email afterwards. So thank you very much for coming. And thank you very much to Nicola and Naya and Louise for their presentations. And now we get to clap them. Thank you very much indeed.